everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Attachment Theory in Action. I have the privilege today of sitting down with Robert Karen, the phenomenal author of Becoming Attached. Today, Robert is going to be talking to us more about his second edition of Becoming Attached and telling us about the new chapters, some of the additions that he has made, as well as talking a little bit about some of his previous work as well, which has been foundational to the field of attachment theory. A little bit about Bob. He is a clinical psychologist in private practice in New York City and author of The Forgiving Self, among many other books. His cover stories on attachment and shame, both in The Atlantic and his legendary book, Becoming Attached, the first edition, have all been widely taught in psychology programs across the US and translated for readers abroad. Shame was also awarded the National Psychology Award for Excellence in the Media. In 2024, the 30th anniversary revised edition of Becoming Attached, with 12 new chapters and numerous updates and revisions, was brought out by the Oxford University Press. Dr. Karen has written widely for mainstream media, including New York Magazine, The Nation, the Sunday News Magazine, the Yale Review, the Oprah Magazine, Mirabella, and Vogue, among others. His professional articles have appeared in Contemporary Psychoanalysis, the Psychoanalytic Quarterly, Readings, the American Journal of Orthopsychiatry, and the Psychoanalytic Review. He teaches on the faculty of the postgraduate program in group psychotherapy at Adelphi University. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome him today. Well, hi, Bob. Thank you so much for joining me for the Attachment Theory in Action podcast. I know some of our long-term listeners will have had a chance to listen to you as you spoke to my predecessor, Karen. But for me, it's just an absolute pleasure to welcome you back so that you can tell us a little bit more about your revised edition of Becoming Attached. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So my current listeners, at least, they know that I like to start our conversations with the same question for everyone. And that question is, was there anything in your early life, maybe, or your early career that's kind of led you into attachment? You know, what got you to where you are today? Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Well, I think I was born a psychologist.
Okay.
When I would meet relatives I hadn't seen since I was a child, and they'd ask, "What have I done with my life?" And I told them I'm studying psychology. I've become a psychologist. They would say, "Well, that's no surprise." And they only knew me as an 8-year-old. But there was a lot of stuff going on between the lines in my family. There was a lot of alliances and hurts and conflicts that weren't resolved, that weren't repaired. Um, there wasn't enough love. There wasn't enough leaning on love. Um, and one of the ways I dealt with it was to be acutely aware. I noticed when someone was playing for advantage in something he or she was saying, or being hurtful, or proving him or herself in some way, or getting even. So I had all this. I wasn't even aware that I had it. I didn't know I was different from anybody else. But I always had interest in psychology, though. And when I was in therapy, my psychologist suggested to me I might want to join the field. You're a natural. And I did. And I think my family life had a lot to do with why. And I think maybe something in me, temperamentally, something maybe biologically or genetically could have played a part too.
Okay. Okay. What I really heard from what you just described is, and tell me if this is right or not, or if it seems accurate, but you really became acutely aware of relationships, I feel like. Is that what you
Yeah,
just, would you describe it like that?
absolutely. It's
And even,
important. It's important distinction because that's what attachment is all about.
hmm hmm And so even as a young child, that was something that you had become hyper aware to those
Yeah,
relationships.
yeah.
Okay, okay. So, um, in in your previous edition of Becoming Attached, which, by the way, I have the first treasured edition right here. Um, and I also have your Atlantic article too, which is fascinating, and everybody should read that. All of my listeners should read that too. But you have your previous edition. Tell us a little bit about what's changed between, or what you've added or adjusted to from the first edition into this new second edition.
Well, one thing I've done is I've added a whole, excuse me, a whole section on called Life as It Is, and the subtitle is Mourning, Integration, and Repair. And there are like, it starts out with giving credit to the antecedents, to the people who were antecedents of attachment theory, like Winnicott and Melanie Klein and some other psychoanalysts who didn't join in with Bowlby with his ideas exactly, but they had their own idea about relationships that use different words, but really approach the subject in a very similar way. The big thing that Bowlby had that they did not have was Mary Ainsworth, his
Mhm.
partner, his partner in writing and research. She um, she made it she made it operational. She's the one who discovered the strange situation or created the strange situation, and and after that, it became a factor in developmental psychology all over the world. So that's one thing I talk about is the people who made contributions who aren't really acknowledged as antecedents of attachment. Um, and Then I talk about mourning integration and repair in a single chapter where I emphasize that it's the child, what the child gets from the parent in loss and hurt and damage, how it's repaired or not repaired goes a long way in determining whether the strength of that child's secure profile. In fact, there's so many things. I mean, everybody knows what gets told to children if a parent dies or a pet dies or they have to miss a few months of school because of a terrible disease. So I wanted to give an example of a parent, and also one of the things that always happens when someone dies is they get idealized. And for a
Mhm.
child, that's very difficult to idealize a parent. But it's definitely a strong inclination when a parent is gone. So I have this example here from the new book about a father who doesn't behave that way. Okay, I'm reading now. Bess, a child whose mother died when she was 3.5, announced one evening to her father, "Mommy called and said she'd have dinner with us," clearly believing it was true. Her father said, "I think you wish Mommy would have dinner with us. When we miss Mommy so very much, we'd like to think she is not really dead. I guess it will be a sad dinner for both of us." I thought that was very special.
Mhm.
And I think it probably went a long way in Beth's life to keep her from feeling devastated. I also talk in that chapter about a ball player named Ricky Leday, a baseball player, who played for the Yankees in New York. His um, his teammates couldn't understand him. He'd always sit in the locker without talking to anybody. And it turned out that a reporter asked him about his history, and it was published in the New York Times. And what Ricky said about his life was that when he was a small boy, his father went on a had to go on a business trip somewhere, and Ricky and his father had a fight that morning, and his father tried to give him a kiss before he left, but Ricky was no. Anyway, his father was in a car crash and died that day.
Mm.
And Ricky spent days and days just staring out at the horses in the field, not comforted by anyone, not given any help with the loss, not being told it wasn't his fault or that daddy didn't love him because Ricky wouldn't kiss him. He didn't get any of that. His mother was preoccupied with the other children and with their own loss, and Ricky had to take care of himself. And this was the way he did it. He did it by being silent. He said he didn't want to hurt, he said in this article in the paper, he didn't want to hurt anybody, so he just stays silent. He feels provoked, but he just stays silent. He said this over and over again. And I thought, what a sad case of spoiled attachment
Hmm.
that this boy never had the attention of someone who could guide him out of, this terrible trap of feeling responsible. You look like you've been affected by those stories.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I I think about the trajectory for each of those individuals, and as you said, the young child who's lost a mother, and the the difference between the two of them, and the ball player and baseball
Yeah.
player, and how his trajectory could have been much different had he had somebody there to support him during that time. I'm also, though, thinking about many caregivers, whether they're in a role of whether they're a parent, a foster parent, a caseworker, become caregivers really. It, they don't know what they don't know. And so often, death particularly, people don't know what to say or how to respond. Um, but I love that you're talking about it from an attachment perspective.
Yeah, I think that in the later years, beyond infancy, beyond the 1 year evaluation of the strained situation, that a parent's secure making abilities get really heavily focused on loss and repair. And the loss can take the form of a pet dying, or it can be the loss of a friend. It could be falling down and scraping your knee and feeling like the world's about to end
Hmm.
because the pain is screeching. And one way or another, the secure making parent finds a way to hold the child either with words or with arms and keep his security intact. I know I had the experience with my son where um, after my wife and I separated, I took my son when he was 4, or maybe a little older. He was a little older. He was maybe 6, to an extended family gathering from my side of the family in Massachusetts on Cape Cod. And he wouldn't talk to me. He wouldn't have anything to do with me. Everything I said was wrong. Every way he could, he rejected me. And it was really, I was flabbergasted. And when we got home, I said to him, Rafi, I think I know why you were so angry at me on the Cape. And he was like, really interested. I said, well, all the other people, all the other kids there had two parents. You were the only one with one. It must have really hurt. He said, that's right. It made me want to blow up the whole world. And then if some other little bad thing happened, it was that much worse. And I thought, what he gained by saying that must have been enormous.
Hmm.
That he can put it into words. I wanted to blow up the whole world, which I think certainly fits for me if I have a loss like that.
Hmm. And I think what I'm really hearing you say is for us as caregivers and caregivers who wish to promote that security is to to not be afraid to help young people put words to their experiences, even if you, and I want to give grace to our folks that are listening who are maybe raising children who have experienced a loss, that even if you don't know what to say or you don't have an answer necessary. I mean, the first example you gave, the father didn't have an answer that was going to fix everything. Mommy's not coming back. And, you don't have to have an answer. You don't have to have the answer that waves a magic wand. It's more about how you be with your child through those difficult experiences and allow them to share whatever it is that's coming up for them. Would that be accurate?
Absolutely. It makes me think of another example of, and tell me if I'm going through too many examples.
Mm-mm. No, it's wonderful. Thank you for sharing.
Okay. Um, it's about a little boy named Patrick who was to be taken care of at Anna Freud's wartime. I forget what the word was, but it was not quite a school or a hospital. Hospital. It was a refuge whose parents were sleeping in the subway, in the tunnels. And but his mother only visited him once a week. And when she visited him, she made it very clear he was not allowed to cry. And I thought, oh, it gave me a knife in the heart to read that because
Mm.
I know how essential it is to cry and to feel heard and to be able to unload with a person you know is going to help you and want to hug you and want to be on your side. And of course, all that it relates to attachment. But he didn't get that. Instead, he got this warning. And meanwhile, he missed her like crazy. And he would spend much of his time enacting a little scene all by himself as if he was preparing for a play on stage. He would be standing in his corner, going, talking about mommy's going to come and get me. Mommy's going to dress me. Mommy's going to put on my little pixie hat. Mommy's going to do this. Mommy's going to do that. And the staff were being driven nuts listening to this kid. So one of them said very nicely, would you chill because it's going to be a drag. So he stopped his vocalizations, but he kept moving through what they represented. So he'd walk a few steps in one direction, he'd put on his hat, he would put his coat on with his mother's help, and he did it exactly the same each time. And people were being driven nuts again. And he was told, do you think you could stop that, all that, And he did. And all that was left in the end was a series of inexplicable tics.
Mm.
This is a guy who's going to have tics when he grows up and have no idea where they came from. And no one else is going to understand because there's nothing obvious that they symbolize. They symbolize something, but to get to it would be very hard. And he probably doesn't have the memory because why would he return to those painful moments? So I was very intrigued by that. I thought, wow, you see someone with a twitch and
Hmm.
you think it's neurological, but not necessarily.
Hmm.
And I think, Bowlby was very interested in this subject, as you can imagine. I think your listeners probably know who John Bowlby is,
I hope so.
founder of Attachment. Um, he wrote a book about a biography of Charles Darwin, which was trying to solve a medical mystery just like Patrick's, because Darwin had um, lots of like distresses, upper respiratory distress, um, stomach distress, all kinds of things that were tremendously burdensome to him. And Bowlby thought that it had never been given an adequate answer as to where these medical conditions came from. No one had an answer. But it turned out that Darwin lost his mother when he was 8, and his older sister and his father would not allow any mention of her in the house anymore. because apparently because I should say, I don't know, apparently because the loss was too painful to them and they couldn't face it. And the sister ended up being Darwin's caretaker, and she wasn't all that nice. And from perhaps living in a world of, if not bliss, just a good world, a good enough world where he had all his family and it was what he needed, he was now in a state of permanent loss.
Mm.
And this is what Bowlby discovered. And I think it fits in so well with the theme of mourning. I want to also mention a more physical loss. I talk about this both in the introduction to the book and in the morning chapter, where I'm at the playground with my son and an older boy, maybe 3 or 4, um, falls down and scrapes his knee, I think, and he's wailing, and he throws up his arms and he's wailing, but he doesn't really look at his mother or seem to beckon her in any way. She grabs him, and her immediate job is to put a bandage on his scraped knee. He's totally stiff in her arms, wiggling, not yielding, and still crying like crazy.
Mm.
And she's fighting like mad to get him and to pin him down so she can get that bandage on. And I thought, oh my God, this is a disaster. She has no interest at all in why he's crying or why he's holding himself like a stiff pole or why he won't cooperate. He wants physical attention, but not the kind you're giving him. He wants a hug. He wants reassurance. He wants a promise that the pain will get better and he'll be able to run out and play again. Nothing, nothing, just a continuous mumbling on her part as if she's talking to herself. And that's another loss that doesn't get repaired. It's just, it's just a scrape, but it becomes something much bigger when insecure attention is focused on it.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think when you mentioned about the piece about loss, my brain went to the big losses, but also to those, I'm thinking about those minute relational losses that happen throughout the course of a day, that
This
contribute
reminds
to that.
me, this reminds me of another new section of the book where I talk about how security manifests itself in teenagers and adults.
Mm,
And that one of the key traits is the ability to be in a conflict with someone without demonizing him, without saying never again, I've had it, without losing concern for how you're treating him when you're arguing back. But maybe most of all, being able to tolerate his having a negative opinion about you and what you did. It's like, it's not the end of the world. I don't believe he's right about me, but I think we're still friends and we're going to stay friends. And our future probably is better, rosier than the present. And I think this happens, if it happens at all, in the closest of relationships. I think it's a vital quality that at least if one person has it, it makes the relationship that much stronger.
hmm
I
It
can, I can, my cousin doesn't like me, and I think I know why. I wouldn't like me either if I was just looking at that part of me. But we're cool, and I'll try to do better. Not,
why
I want to put a stake through his heart because he put he put words to this thing I hate about myself.
Right, right. Well, and I was going to say, Bob, and ask you, why do you think we get so hung up on and it's not just with our kids, but with anyone. Why do you think we get so hung up on what others say and we can't compartmentalize maybe, or even not even that, but maybe say, oh, okay, maybe that is how you perceive something about me, and take that on and move forward. We get so stuck and we
I think
can't.
I think we get governed at those moments by our insecure selves.
Mm,
I think we all have a secure self and an insecure self, maybe many of each. And uh, what often happens when you feel under attack is that your insecure self takes over. And one of the factors about the insecure self is that it loses all sense of complexity. And the insecure self isn't able to be reflective, to live in a complex world where the answer doesn't just go in one direction, where no one's entirely right and no one's entirely wrong. And I write about. I imagine a case of a woman whose father refuses to accept her homosexuality. She's like in her 20s. She's out of the house, but she's able to realize that whatever happens, I still love him, no matter what he does. And one of the reasons I am able to accept my own homosexuality is because of all the acceptance he gave me when I was a kid. And I think that's an example of the secure self at work.
mhm.
There's elements of repair like that in the animal world. There's a famous case by Myron Hofer wrote it up. He was a rat researcher and a correspondent with Bowlby. He thought it was very interesting. This was before Bowlby was even known in the United States. But Hofer was interested in Bowlby, excuse me, because they both were interested in separation and its impact on the young. And one day, a rat escaped from the cage where it had been kept with its pups, and she was gone for several days. And the rats went through the baby rats, her offspring, went through a series of catastrophic changes um, physiologically, and Hofer documents them all. And an interesting sidelight to this is that when the mother rat returns to the cage, all the babies get better instantly. The heart rates improve. There are all kinds of secretions, and everything comes back to normal. And she begins a period of extended licking of each baby. Normally, they lick the babies a certain amount, and that's enough. But under this circumstance, the mother rat recognized that more was needed. She picked up on their distress.
I love that. I love that example because I think that for a lot of people, attachment is not particularly, it's not a concept that's easy to grasp, because it feels very, it's an in the brain thing, right? Well, people assume it's an in the brain thing when it's for us in the field, it's so clearly visible. But it is a concept that people find difficult to grasp. And I think that animal examples are helpful to help people understand and see that this is kind of a fundamental need that, yeah, I mean, right back to Harlow's monkeys. I mean, um, but
Bobby was friends with Harlow too.
right. Um, I wanted to go back to what you mentioned though about kind of all of us, we all, even if we measure as having a secure attachment style, and I believe I've probably said this on an episode before, but I share this readily with folks that I train, that my adult attachment interview came back as, secure dismissive. I'm mostly secure. I have a tendency to become dismissive. Um, and I really feel that attachment is on a continuum, that there is no perfect secure attachment, that we all have, as you mentioned, these insecurities, and dependent on our experiences, depending on who we're in a relationship with at the time, that the extent to which that's triggered is different. Um, and you mentioned in our kind of get to know you conversation about, the more we can live with our insecurities, the more we can welcome those insecurities, the more likely we are, or the better the healing journey towards security comes. Would you agree with that still?
Yes, excuse me. I think that it's again getting back to that issue of complexity versus demonization or idealization. And I think that the secure side is capable of holding contradictory terms together. You know, you hurt me a lot, but I love you.
Mm-hmm.
I want to kill you, but I love you. So I probably won't. And that's a very important part of secure attachment that I don't think gets emphasized enough. That that we all go to a binary kind of place in our minds. You know, it's black or white. Everything is black or white. And there are people who live that way all the time, very loudly, and they can't understand why others object. They say, look,
Mm-hmm.
this is the way it is. This is the way it is. And that person deserves to be executed. Um, I don't think it gets recognized enough in attachment theory, that factor, partly because attachment theory is very wedded to research. So it's hard to make statements like that without having some research to back you up.
I feel that it's something that I've learned in the last, I don't know, 6 or 7 years of really working in the early childhood, within the early childhood field, is, we talk a lot to educators specifically about the social emotional milestones that children go through, and how attachment really is the foundational milestone. It's the first major milestone that infants go through and achieve and attain. And really trying to, what we try to do is hone in on the fact that if that milestone is disrupted somehow, the additional milestones, the subsequent milestones that will come after, are likely to be disruptive, of which object constancy is, really milestone number three that we talk about, at least after attachment and a psychological home base, being the one, two, and three milestones. And so, what you've just described right there is that object constancy, that we're unable to hold, as you say, unless we have a secure attachment, those contradictions, that I
I think
can.
we find it very refreshing when we run into it in other people. You know, when you realize that something you've said might cause offense, and you discover it's being handled caringly, and maybe you're being corrected, but caringly. And you could almost want to go up and hug that person because your childhood experience is that never happened.
Mhm.
If you were bad, you were bad.
So in the second edition, Bob, you've written a chapter about adult attachment specifically. Now, I know we've kind of weaved some of this into our conversation. Is there anything that you wanted to share specifically about that chapter with our listeners?
Interestingly enough, the part of the chapter that interests me the most, well, two parts interest me a lot. One is um, this group therapy, the session I described. It's the same chapter where a woman who was kind of reticent for a long time suddenly bursts out with a defense of her reticence and the impact that has. And that also is an issue of complexity. You know, everyone is making an issue of the fact that you don't talk about yourself, We don't really hardly know you. Come on, open up. And it gets pretty like um, burdensome after a while to be talked to this way over and over again. And finally, she bursts out with, "I'm not open. I'm not going to be open. I'm not going to do follow the group rules. I'm not going to. I don't want any of your group think. This is who I am." And everybody is kind of stunned. And it was really, I thought, an exercise in freedom. That she was declaring her right to be who she was. And so so it wasn't just an act of freedom, I thought. It was an act of security, of self-security, a sense that she had a right to be who she was, that she could proclaim it and not get murdered. She grew up with a mother who, as far as the mother was concerned, there was only one person in the family, and that was the mother herself.
Mm,
And everyone else was a subsidiary who was there to flatter her and make her life easy. And when you face that kind of narcissism, there's various ways you adapt. But one way that she had adapted was to become very helpful, very articulate, knowing in advance when her mother needed something and what might bother her, being her mother's kind of amanuensis. And and then when she ran off to school, she was having a good time being who she was. But that was limited because it wasn't supported at home. And by the time she got to group, it was pretty clear that she had some problems in being open with people. She could present her very competent self, which was amazing and admirable, but this other part of her was had to be hidden. And this was a great, I thought, statement of I'm here, I got a right to be here, and don't you dare tell me I don't.
mm.
And you're okay too. I don't hate you.
I I'm gonna dive into something a little bit here, just for a minute. And this is a little bit my personal interest, but a couple of things that we've talked about so far that you've brought up are making me think about it. And so you mentioned earlier about the young boy who in I I, I want to hopefully I get this one right in Anna Freud's uh center, and the one who was repeating his actions because the mother didn't would only visit once a week, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And how it ended up becoming kind of tick-like behavior. um and then thinking about this woman in this group and how she had become, almost that people pleaser, but in other areas of her life, she had to be kind of perfect. Her competence and confidence had to come out. And so both of them have developed ways to cope, right? If we want to put it as simply as that. Um, so my personal interest, my studies were in forensic psychology. And so I have a lot of interest in the ways in which our experiences, um, create problematic behaviors for us, which tics are can be perceived as problematic, mainly because we do not, as a society, accept people who are different to us. Someone who is overly confident and almost maybe showy sometimes may not be widely accepted. But then I think about more of the psychosis symptoms and that kind of thing that can come up. And um, I don't know, I just wondered about your thoughts on that. And is it possible that people, because of those early life experiences, can end up, in a place where they do things that they wouldn't have necessarily done?
I would say a cautionary yes. because we don't know enough about the etiology of psychosis or schizophrenia.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a strong feeling among some psychiatrists that it's purely uh, genetic. And the reason why they hold this view is that if you take someone who's schizophrenic and they have an identical twin they're growing up with, that twin is 50, there's a 50% likelihood that twin will also end up being schizophrenic. And
Mm-hmm.
everyone says 50%. The normal population size of the schizophrenic population is 2%. If you've got a bunch that are coming out 50%, that's a very strong connection to genetics
Mm-hmm.
because that's what they have in common. But from my point of view, the fact that it's not 100% says it's not all genetic.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, there'd be no gap. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a 50% of those 100 siblings don't show the signs. And I think that what happens in between, it differs. A lot of it has to do with the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And there's all kinds of other influences on the child. You just don't know. They have some of these studies that have been done with twins, especially twins raised apart, have been just fascinating because, well, even it's not even the studies, it's the newspaper articles, twins were meeting for the first time when they're 37 and they both are wearing exactly the same outfit and their husbands have the same name and they had a hysterectomy at the same age. You it's stunning. And who knows what it means, because I believe in coincidence as well as everything else.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, I know my question and line of topic is was a little morbid, but for me, it's about how do we how do we help find and create hope for people who do have um, who do experience loss, who do experience disruptions in the attachment formation, and so that they are able to lead healthy, happy lives with fulfilling relationships rather than going down a route that is the opposite, that is unhealthy and unsafe for them. So
I think that
every go ahead.
this gets to something you mentioned about the new book. It has a chapter on something I call beckoning.
Mm,
And I think when if you're working with someone who's in prison, you've got a lot to prove to that person before he or she is going to trust you. And you're going to face a lot of disappointment because you're in some way putting your heart out there and it's not being accepted. But I think if you can gain that trust, and you can only gain it if you believe it's there to be gained, um, then what they would really need from you more than almost anything is an ear, someone who really is interested and really wants to know. And one of the things you have to do to get there is not jump to those places where you normally go when you're rejected. Um, it's again that issue I raised earlier about holding on to the complexity and holding on to your own complexity, not letting yourself go. That's it. That's it. I'm through with this person.
that's exactly what we have to do with our children that are in our care as well. The exact same thing. Which
And people do it naturally with children more than anyone else. They
uh,
do it in two parents and psychoanalysts, or maybe psychologists in general, do it consistently with children or patients. But in other relationships, it doesn't get done so
mhm,
much.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think about, you mentioned the prison population. And I know that there are other variables that come into play, but we're so very quick to uh, take it personally, that rejection. And I love that. I love what you said, to not be so quick to go to the place that, the place that you feel when you experience rejection. Um, And I love that you put it that way, because it's when I think about working with children with challenging behaviors, and that really, you really summed it up, that they're rejecting you. Their behaviors are rejecting you. And for most helpers and most people who are mostly securely attached, have a secure attachment style, for the most part, they that
You
doesn't
believe
feel
that?
nice.
Are you sure? I'm sorry. I talked over you. Most people what?
It doesn't feel nice when you
Right.
get rejected, right? And so, and I think about so many of our people working with young children and children now with challenging behaviors, that they, for them to realize that they're going to a place of rejection, instead of separating that and saying that this child is not rejecting me, they're having a hard time and their behaviors are showing it, then we're in a better position to support and provide help for that child.
I was on the infant and child ward during my internship at Bellevue in Manhattan. And one of my patients there was this little boy, I don't know, 6, who came into my office and he was up and down, in and out, jumping on the chair, waving his arms, not putting on a show, just like he couldn't stop. And I didn't give him a warning. That's right. That was my big error. I didn't give him a warning. I didn't say, look, if you keep this up, you're going to get a demerit. Demerit was like a horror because you lose something. You lose one of your precious things. I don't know whether it was a cupcake or what, but a demerit was terrible. And I said, okay, I'm giving you a demerit. And he looked crushed. He looked so, I'll never forget it. And it only occurred to me years later that he had no control over it. From his point of view, he was just being driven. And I thought, I don't know if you'd asked me at the time whether I would have said, no, he's doing it on purpose. I wouldn't have said he's doing it on purpose or doing it to make me irritated. But I thought he was indulging himself in some way
Mm.
that he could control. And he couldn't. He couldn't. It was as if he had a medicine in him that gave him ants in the pants. And I didn't have a way of, I guess, not only was I unable to do my work, but I was also flummoxed. And, if I could have just approached the situation with more compassion, even if I didn't get anywhere, it would have been a much better place.
Mhm. Yeah, going back to that, even if you don't have the right answer or the right solution at that time, but just being with and saying, "Whoa, you just have lots of energy right now," or "your body is moving all over," or "you have ants in your pants," or however you might say it, to just be able to be with that, rather
Yeah.
than trying to, use the word feeling flummoxed. I think too often we focus on that discomfort rather than the slightly other discomfort of sitting with just what's going on before we try to push through it. So that's something that we preach with our work and our organization and our staff, is that, all too often it's really about just being with, and to me, that's the foundation of security, is that I'm just going to be with you however you are showing up. Good, bad, ugly.
Hmm.
However you're showing up, I'm going to be with you, and we're going to be in this together, in reciprocity and safety and comfort. Um, so. Bob, it's been wonderful chatting to you. I would love, I just could listen to your stories and your experiences all day. Your examples are fantastic. You said earlier to stop you if you were giving too many examples, but I think it's a wonderful way to bring attachment theory to life. That isn't just words on paper. Okay, I can visualize this. I can see this in the people around me and the experiences that I'm having. So I want to thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom and insight to our listeners. And I encourage them to go out and buy the second edition.
It's got 215 new pages and
Definitely worth it.
12 new chapters.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you.